Hey everybody, happy Monday. How are you? My name is Minda Hartz and I'm your host of Secure the Seat Live. We're here on another Monday and I'm so happy that you're here because let's be honest, you could be anywhere on the internet right now, or since the world is quasi opened up, you can be anywhere. And you're here with us every Monday. If it's your first time joining us, welcome. You're part of the squad. You get your card already. It's official. If you rock with us every Monday at noon, depending on where you are, you already know the vibe. You know that we bring it to you with tangible, actionable steps that you can implement and secure your seat at any table, one of someone else's or one where you're creating your own. But let us know how your weekend was in the chat if you're watching this live. But if you are watching this on the replay, still chime in the comments. We still want to hear from you. I'm really excited about today's episode. Well, first of all, last week, I moved into a new office, and so I was having some lighting issues. Today, we're back in business. Okay, and so you can see my face. I even did my hair for my friend Smiley. So make sure you drop any comments that you might have, not about my lighting, but about how your weekend was. Also, I wanted to tell you that we're about a month and a half away from my next book, Right Within: How to Heal from Racial Trauma in the Workplace. I'm so excited about this book. It's my second born, my second child. I don't have any physical children. And so this is, it feels like another birth coming down the pipeline. So I am excited. And one thing, when I wrote the memo, my first book, I was in that weird publishing process, trying to figure out what to do next. And Smiley, my guest and friend, he was very instrumental in taking time with me and giving me, pulling the covers back, because as most of you know, it's kind of, you don't know what you don't know. And that's why I created, for the second year in a row, our writer's retreat, Secure the Seat writer's retreat, so that you can make sure that you have all of the information that you need to get going. And so we'll drop all of those things in. But today, this is a very timely conversation. So make sure that you ask the questions, use the chat. We're discussing how to create friendship in the age of loneliness within the workplace. Smiley Adam, he is a friend. He is an international speaker, a millennial workplace expert, the author of a new book that I just finished, which I really need you all to get it. We're going to drop the link in. This is really important. I would even say, as we're returning back to the office in many cases, that this is a bulk buy that you definitely want to get for your team. But Friendship in the Age of Loneliness. So I want to bring Adam to the stage. Smiley, for those who might know him by that name as well. Hey, friend, how are you?
Hi, Minda. I'm well. Thanks so much for having me today. It's great to be here.
Great to be here with you. You have been in my book, I call it a success partner, but for some of us, an ally. So I just want to say thank you for the work that you do, not just for me, but for how you show up for others. For those who may not know about your work, tell us a little more about you.
Sure. So I've been speaking at companies now for the past 8 years. I wrote a book self-published in 2014 called The Quarter Life Breakthrough, which was a career guide for millennials to find meaningful work. Kind of about my own journey to find meaning and purpose in the workplace, and the young people I met along the way that weren't just interested in making money, but actually wanted to give back and wanted to do good in the world and wanted to kind of define what meaning was for them. So I wrote a book about my own generation, kind of this idea that we're not the me generation, we're the purpose generation. And it sold 10,000 copies, self-published, and led to kind of my publishing career and my speaking career. So one of the big lessons I learned is that, sometimes you got to do it on your own and try to invent your own path. That's the subtitle of my first book, is Invent Your Own Path and Find Meaningful Work. Not to just rely on the gatekeepers that be, or the power structures that be, and really kind of create things and opportunities for yourself when it comes to career success and what's meaningful to you. So I started speaking about attracting and retaining young talent and intergenerational kind of collaboration. And I've been focused lately on a topic that I think affects both young people and people of all ages, which is disconnection and loneliness in the world that we live in, and especially in the world of work, where we spend most of our lives that we're not sleeping, because it's an epidemic. It was an epidemic prior to COVID, prior to a year. I guess it's been almost 2 years now of social isolation and lockdown measures and work from home. but 2/3 of Americans are lonely. 2/3, right? This is hundreds of millions of people, including 80% of Gen Z young people and 70% of millennials are lonely. Again, this is all data from before the pandemic, and yet we don't talk about it. So I wanted to write a book that kind of normalized conversations around loneliness. And I wrote it because my name's Smiley, right? I'm an extroverted dude. In normal times, I go around speaking. I meet people like you. We go to conferences and events and co-working spaces. We're always around people. And I was struggling with loneliness. So I'm like, if I'm struggling with loneliness and I'm Smiley, this is a big problem, right? I'm an extrovert. I'm out there. I'm struggling with this. So other people probably are too. Let's talk about it. Let's normalize it. Let's have that conversation.
And I am so glad you did. We're dropping the link in the chat so you all can have access to that. But your new book is called Friendship in the Age of Loneliness, An Optimist's Guide to Connection. You touched on it a little bit, Smiley, but why is this book especially relevant and important right now as we emerge from, I guess, a quasi-pandemic? We're still in one, right? But we're emerging.
I know. I thought we were like almost opening. I had some live events coming back, but they all got canceled. Yeah, so if you're out there, and I feel you. And, you know, as a speaker, folks like Minna and I, we've, you know, really had to pivot our businesses and lost so much business. So I have so much love and respect for all the speakers and facilitators and meeting planners out there, event folks that do events and run live events, because we had to pivot. Now we have to pivot again and we're all ready to go back. So just some shout outs and love to those folks. But the reason it matters now is that loneliness has even increased. It was already at epidemic levels, right? The Surgeon General actually called loneliness an epidemic. It was already at epidemic levels before COVID, and we've seen skyrocketing rates of loneliness, especially among working parents, highest rates among working mothers and young people in the pandemic. And the thing about loneliness, it's not just like, oh, I'm lonely. This is actually making people unwell. So there's a correlation between loneliness and rising rates of stress, inflammation, heart disease, Alzheimer's, right? Actually making loneliness as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's how unhealthy it is to feel alone, to feel like you don't have people in your life. And meanwhile, the flip side of that, having social connection, having social support increases your chance of survival by 50%, right? So it's literally a lifeline. It gives people hope. It gives people something to do. It gives people excitement, support. I mean, it's kind of fundamental. Yet we only spend 4% of our time with our friends. And we're having a friendship epidemic right now. Average American hasn't made a new friend in the last 5 years. 1 in 5 people have zero close social connections. 0. 15% of men have no close connections at all. And then you think about all of the things that can stem from that, it leads to major social issues. So I think the timing right now is pretty important, because if the pandemic had a silver lining, it's that we get to talk about this, right? So just a quick anecdote with my book. I pitched this book at the end of 2019. We closed the book deal in February of 2020. So that's like a month before the pandemic started raging across the United States. And they liked the idea. They're like, friendship's an important topic, but you can't put loneliness in the title. So they're like, we'll buy the book, but we might change the title. And I was like, all right, fine. Like, I want it out there. The message matters. Got to make compromises. That's part of being a creative and entrepreneur, right? And then 6 weeks later, it's the middle of the pandemic. Everyone's locked down at their home. And the publisher reaches back out. They're like, we love the title. Loneliness can be in there. Everyone's lonely. I'm like, exactly. But the thing is, the point was, we could name it, right? It took a pandemic. It took everyone being at their home, not able to see their coworkers on a regular basis, not able to have those water cooler moments, those conversations, those lunch breaks, those coffee dates, you know, those events, not being able to see their friends. And many people weren't even able to see their own grandchildren or their parents because, you know, they were worried about, you know, people that were more vulnerable or people that were getting people sick, to actually say, oh, I'm struggling with loneliness, right? But the data showed it before. 2/3 of Americans struggle with this. This is, you know, an epidemic across the world. So I think this moment allows us to talk about things that we were all feeling prior to COVID, and COVID just made them come up to the surface a little bit more. And now, especially as we return to work, we're not returning to work in the normal way, right? even as some offices open and some people have return to office plans and, oh, you have to be vaccinated and some folks are going back to work, hybrid or remote is here to stay in some form. For almost most of the largest companies in the world are going to have some sort of a situation where some of their workforce is spread out across the country or the world, and some people are going into the office on some days and some people are at home. And this can work, but one of the major issues that comes up with it is the lack of human connection at work. So yes, we can do the Zooms and we can, use Slack and we can get our work done, but what do we lose when we're not face to face? And I think really the future of work lies in making sure that we stay connected at work, because the costs of loneliness at work are enormous. Loneliness can cost companies, US companies alone, $406 billion a year, right? There's correlation between loneliness and increased sick days, which makes sense, right? You're not feeling good, you're probably more likely to take sick days, higher risk of turnover, disengagement, cost of the company in terms of healthcare and health plans. And on the flip side of that, employees who have the connection and the belonging, right? They do better work. They're more engaged. They stay at the company longer. They show up for their people longer. They help the company make more money. They do all the things that we want companies to do, like what we want people to do, but we don't talk about it enough and we don't design around it. So I think that this is like an opportunity for that.
Smiley, I mean, you are giving us so much, dropping all the gems. I have to get my tambourine out because these are some ugly truths, but some important truths that we have been sitting in. And, prior to the pandemic, I don't know that I can't remember a time where I ever said, oh, I feel lonely or depressed or, like I've had moments where I felt those things, but I never would have said it out loud, right? It was inside my head. But then I started leaning more into that because I'm this is a feeling that I'm feeling, right? Before I would go out, you'd see your friends maybe at brunch, or like you said, we're speakers, we'd be on the circuit. So you're meeting people all the time. And even just the small things, like after watching a show and not having anybody to talk to, I'm oh, I guess I'll go see you on Twitter. Who's watching this show? It's just things that I wouldn't have probably done necessarily a lot before. But I realized that I consider myself an introvert, but I did miss that human connection. And so I'm so glad that you talked about that. I want to jump into something you said about, many companies forming a hybrid. So, I know we have some people out there who are probably the Drake motto, no new friends, but we do need some friends at work. So what are some of the benefits of having friends at work and why does it matter?
Yeah, so employees, I think the biggest statistic that it just kind of says it all is employees who have a best friend at work are 7 times more engaged, period. If you can actually say, this is my best work friend, work husband, work wife, whatever you want to call it, work person, work partner, those people are just statistically more engaged. If you don't have that person, you only have a 1 in 12 chance of being engaged with your work. Right. And as you know, one of the main things companies are going for is employee engagement. That is the piece of it, right? Engaged employees do good work. They're happier. They show up for people. They make the company perform better, more profits, more impact in the world. That's what this is all about. And we have a huge disengagement problem, across corporate America. One of the ways we can fix that is simple. It's also free, by the way, is to allow for friendship. I'm not saying it's easy, but to allow for friendship and to create, opportunities for people to have friendship at work. And I think, there's often been a stigma around this. Again, I think it's changing, but it's that's work. That's my job. I have my friends. I'm not trying to make friends at work. I got work to do. And I get that. But what we're seeing now is that because the lines are blurring and we're spending a lot of time now, frankly, at home working, many times because that's where we have to be working, especially, folks that are parents will identify with this, or, folks that are taking care of family members, there's a little bit of, hey, this is where I'm spending most of my days. I still want to be connecting with people. I want to get to know them. I want to learn a little bit more about them than just the way we say, oh, do this, do that. Here's your KPIs. You're supposed to, your job description says, check this box, but who are you as a person? What's going on in your life? Would you like to share? I'd like to get to know you. I want to know your story. I want to connect with you. I want to learn from something from you, even and especially if we're different, right? right? We have a different experience, a different background. We come from a different place. We didn't all get here the same way. What value do you have to add to my life that, I don't, that I frankly need, that we need, that our organizations and teams need. So I think that there's a real opportunity there. But like the biggest thing is that, when employees have a best friend, they're more engaged. They also are less lonely, right? If you have a friend, more friends at work, you're less lonely on the UCLA loneliness scale, which is kind of the definitive metric for measuring loneliness out there. It's also simple, it makes sense, but yet we don't really talk about it. And we don't create time. Like, usually in a meeting, like a virtual meeting or even an in-person meeting, it's just like, boom, agenda, let's go. Right. And it's the person with like the senior person, the C-level person or the manager's like, all right, boom, 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 agenda. How about a check-in? How was everyone's weekend? Or a prompt, an improv, like, can anyone share any wisdom that, an elder in their life has recently shared with them, or a change that you're going through, or a book you just read, or a podcast you listened to, or, what show have you been watching, right now, and just open up that space to see if there's a little bit of a place for people to check in and share a little vulnerably and get to know each other beyond just the work life.
Absolutely. This is so good. I see people in the chat just really, really latching on and saying, yeah, we haven't always been conditioned to talk about some of these taboo topics of being lonely and then, maybe depression and all those sorts of things. And so I'm so glad you wrote the book. We're going to drop it in the chat so that everybody can go and cop that right away. Just digging a little more into the friendships in the workplace. What are a few tips and strategies you can share? I see some people inside the chat ask people to go on walks. They identify 5 people when they first, join a company. I'm just curious what strategies you found, especially during this time. I mean, I believe there's probably somebody watching right now who was hired during the pandemic, so they didn't have an opportunity to make a friend, right, as they return back to work in the same way. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Smiley.
Yeah, so I'm big on rituals. I think that kind of taking these big concepts and then translating them to kind of practical rituals. I think I have a chapter in my book called Embrace Ritual. I think that's big for friendship, period. Let's just even start with outside of work, right? So I have a group of friends. We go on a boys' hike every year. I have people, going to a cooking club or being part of a book club because it's recurring, right? It's simple, but it's on the calendar. You're like, oh, got to meet with book club this month, or you got girls' night. Right? It's Wednesday nights, like get together, have a glass of wine with the girls. It's on the calendar. It's repetitive. We can do that stuff in the workplace too. So you mentioned onboarding. There's so many people now, they've started a job. They haven't met any of their coworkers. And the first thing they get is like, fill out all these forms. Good luck, peace. That's it. It's like, man, what a way to start a day. Like, what a way to start your week at your new company. You haven't even met people. So I say, why not create like an onboarding adventure where a new employee would kind of go through the company, meet different people. They won't even have to do work for the first couple of days. They would just be having conversations. They'd almost have to go on like a little scavenger hunt to get to know their different coworkers, different managers, even in departments that they're not working in, right? Let's say they're an engineer. They should still be talking to the DEI team, right? They should still be talking to folks that are on the people ops team, getting to know them and learning about what they do and building those connections, especially because they can't be face-to-face. So little things like that, like onboarding adventures, one-on-one. So, there's a great, for folks that use Slack at work, Donut is this really cool kind of add-on or plug into Slack. It just pairs people for random conversations. It's like, all right, Smiley, you're with Linda this week and you guys have to have a talk. Maybe there's a prompt, or you have to have a coffee date or go for a walk if you're in the same city. And if you're not, you have to have a video chat. Just kind of having those spontaneous conversations. So I think that's big. Creating more kind of opportunities. I know you're big on this with mentorship, but for personal coaching, right? And kind of peer coaching, it doesn't even have to be professional. I think we often think it has to be like, let me help you advance in your career. Just peer coaching. Like, what are you going through right now? Let's talk about it. What's up? What's coming up for you? How can I be a good listener? How can I support you? And, kind of needs and give circles, something that is very simple, but just allowing employees to kind of share things that they need, asks that they have for their coworkers, and things that they're willing to give, right? Maybe they have a great resource for a podcast they listen to, or a great book they just read, or maybe they know a really good, massage therapist or a good therapist or something, whatever it is kind of like sharing, creating those kind of reciprocity where people are sharing what they need and sharing what they can give in the form of ritual and kind of changing that discourse and dialogue.
I love that so much. And I see people in the chat saying they love the onboarding adventure idea. I love that, because you're so right. You're just like inundated with so much stuff and you're like, I need a break, so it's good to have those moments and to be thoughtful, for all us to be thoughtful is how we return, and thinking of that. Just because we've all been working from home doesn't mean we experienced it all the same, so we're returning in that way. So I love that. If you have, we'll probably have time for 1 or 2 questions. I see a few in the chat. Make sure you get them in, but I'm going to jump into my bonus round of questions, because as much as I love talking to Smiley, I'm also curious about what his favorite rap lyric is. I am a lover of grits and rap lyrics. Smiley, I have to ask, are you a grits eater?
I like grits. Yeah.
Okay. How do you, when you do eat grits, how do you like them?
However a place that makes grits makes them. I don't make my own grits.
Okay, cool. Well, that's good. But you like them. You probably really like salt and butter when they arrive.
I like, with shrimp is when I've usually had them. Shrimp and grits.
Boom. I like it. So I have to ask then, what is your favorite rap lyric and why?
All right. Well, I'd say my favorite, or one of my favorite rap lyrics is, I'd open every cell in Attica, send them to Africa. If I ruled the world. Imagine that. I free all my sons. Nas featuring Lauryn Hill. Yes. If I ruled the world, 1996. It was written. Pinnacle of hip hop, that era. I love that lyric. I guess Nas fans should know that the lyric right before that is, "It sound foul, but every girl I need go downtown." So, not the maybe a little bit of a misogynist-ish lyric, although maybe, Nas meant like any girl that he had a meaningful connection with. But I love that lyric because he's talking about freedom. He's talking about Attica, a mass correctional facility in upstate New York, imprisons a lot of Black people, a lot of people of color, and sending people to their ancestral homeland where many people were taken as slaves. So it's kind of like in one line, the epitome of, I think, what hip hop, in fact, what music is often about, which is freedom. I love that whole track. It's just about dreams and what would you do if you could change the world if you were in charge. And he's talking about freeing prisoners. So
that's a great lyric to go into. And there's so many, like, as you mentioned, some double entendres in there, but at the end of it all, it's about freedom. And it's so funny that you say that, because just maybe a couple of weeks ago, or in the last 2 weeks, I was listening to that Nas album, and there were so many, like, you could even play that right now, and there's so many like relevant lines within that as he's talking about freedom. And we're in a position right now where we can free people if we all band together and use our voice. And human connectivity, right, will require that. So thank you, Smiley, for that. And I have to ask, everybody on the call, they're a leader. I believe you don't have to get a promotion. Nobody has to give you permission to be a leader. What is one tip or practice that you would encourage everybody to implement to make the workplace better than they found it?
It's a good question. I would say not wait for change kind of from the institutional level or the organizational level, and say, like, what are 3 things I can do this week to support my people? Not to say those institutional changes need to happen. Sometimes they need to happen real quick, and they've been needing to happen, but to approach work from a place of how can I show up for my people? I think, self-care is important. It's fundamental, but we're shifting into the space where community care, community support, we've seen that, especially, I hope in the pandemic, like, it's not just about us, it's about other people. Hopefully not everyone has quite gotten the message, but things take time, right? Change takes time. So community support. What are a simple way of just like on a daily basis, what is one thing I can do for a coworker today? And maybe even a coworker you don't know very well. Maybe it's not your best friend at work. Maybe it's someone that you're like, I don't even know this person. I'm just gonna, send them a note today, tell them I appreciated something that they shared in a meeting. I'm gonna, just give them some praise, or just ask them a question of like, hey, I was curious. Like, I'd love to get to know you better. Just a simple acknowledgement. The loneliness doesn't have to be these grand gestures. Sometimes it's, friendship is these little steps, right? A little bit of love, a little bit of acknowledgement, just noticing someone, seeing and hearing people, psychological safety, being seen and heard. It starts with these kind of small gestures. So if we can kind of come back to that, I think we'll make a lot of progress.
I love that. And I believe that will help dismantle this feeling of isolation and loneliness. I did see one question that I wanted to, because there was a couple different variations of it in the chat, but I'm paraphrasing, Smiley, but a lot of companies have said, oh, we got to get back to normal. How would you give some of our listeners the language to articulate, okay, maybe what we were dealing with before wasn't good, right? So thinking about how it can be better this time around, because I think there's something with comfort for people to say, let's get back to normal, but normal wasn't the best, right?
Yeah, I don't think we're ever going back to normal, whatever that was. I think that, we're forever changed. I think that we have seen that for some people, working from home just allows more flexibility, right? And allows more time with family. And also we're seeing that just like the burnout and the kind of never ending work wasn't working for people, especially wasn't working for parents, but frankly, for working parents, it really wasn't working for anyone, right? And that's just not going to stand anymore. And that we need to kind of, the conversations we're having now around burnout and mental health, like these are fundamental aspects of work. They're not something that we only talk about after 5 o'clock or after 6 o'clock, or when there's a crisis or something happens. It's like, no, this needs to be a fundamental part of how we take care of our people. So I think the workplace is shifting. It's going to more and more, and will continue. And I think this is good, to what are the needs of the people who work here. This is an organization made up of people. Like, why aren't we listening to what they need and what they want and what's on their minds all of the time, right? Not just in crisis mode, not just when something's in the news, right? 365 every day. And that's not going away. And that's, I think, a shift that needed to happen. It should have happened. But it needed to happen, and I'm glad it's happening. So not to say that things are going to happen overnight. They never do, but we're moving in that direction where we talk about who people are, what they need, what they're struggling with, as part of how we design an equitable, inclusive, connected workplace.
Oh, so good, so good. We have time for one more question. This is a great one too. I just seen it pop up, but can you share some tips? I know earlier you talked about men having some kind of having a little more of a challenge at times on how to do that. Can you please share some tips on how men can make friends? That would be great.
Great question. Yeah, it's something I talk a little bit about in the book, kind of the importance of male friendships. I think that a big piece of this is vulnerability. It's much harder for men to be open and vulnerable, at least traditionally or kind of usually, than it is for women. There's a lot of reasons for this. I think a lot are cultural and kind of societal in terms of how we teach boys, to be tough and to not share their emotions. And you see that in every movie, every video game, every like ad, every magazine of like tough men, like don't show your emotions, don't cry. So teaching men, especially young men, there's a great book out called Better Boys, Better Men, about kind of teaching boys and young men that it's okay to be real. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to have fear. It's okay to have regret, be lonely. All of these things, I think, is like the building blocks, because sometimes men get to, be adults and it's almost too late, or they've learned so much bad habits that's kind of how toxic masculinity kind of evolves. But creating spaces for those conversations. I think you and I both know a friend of mine, Ashanti Branch, does a lot of great work around this. Ever Forward Club, creating spaces for young men, specifically young men of color, to kind of share and be open and be vulnerable with each other. But for any men out there listening, that's also on you to go find those spaces, right? Find a men's group, find a group of men that's kind of cares about personal growth, right? That not just, talking about sports is great. You can do that. Cool. But also people that want to talk about who you are, what you're going for, what your dreams are, what your business goals are, what your personal goals are. So creating more safe spaces for that for men, I think, is fundamental. And in the workplace, we can do that too, right? It doesn't have to be like you see these, like, it's like you can have an ERG that's focused on like conscious male leadership. That's cool. Like it does, like that's important, right? It doesn't have to be like, oh, well, like that's just for women. It's like, no, like men need that too. We need that. And it's actually part of the process. If men don't do the work, specifically a lot of men that are in power, then society's never going to change. So I think that's a big, that would just kind of be like the big picture thinking there. But it's not a simple, it's not a simple, obviously not a simple problem.
But you gave some good tips and strategies and resources there. And yeah, let's normalize those type of groups. I know I speak at a lot of women's ERGs and those sorts of things. And then men come as allies. But to your point, what would it look like if, men had those type of professional development groups and those sorts of things? I have men who have read the memo. They read it originally for their wife or their sister or whomever. And they're like, wait, I needed this too, So
Yep.
it's one of those things where we have to normalize that. So Smiley, I'm just so happy with the work that you are doing, the way that you show up. How can people find you and support you? And we'll drop your link to your book as well again in the chat.
Yeah, you can find me on all the platforms. I'm on LinkedIn, Adam Smiley Poswolsky, on Insta at What's Up Smiley, smileyposwolsky.com. My book is available wherever you buy books.
Yes, please get the book and share today's episode out because we all need this episode. We all need Smiley's book. Gift it to somebody, make somebody's day, make them feel less lonely knowing that they're being thought of in that way. And again, we want to drop one last thing before we go. If you know any women of color who are software engineers or UX design aficionados, we have some opportunities with through our Women of Color Equity Initiative. So we'll drop that in the chat. There's some really great opportunities. So please connect there. And again, Smiley, thank you so much. And to all of you for joining in, we'll see you next Monday at noon. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye, everyone.